If you really want to understand the deeper message of episode 7 of season 3 of The Chosen, then you really don't have to look much further than Philip's feet. A small line in a brief interaction between Philip and Andrew not only highlights some key biblical teachings, it also shows us how these teachings are woven throughout the entire episode. In places where these events occur, in side comments about seemingly random subjects like Jesus' lineage, and in some of the most surprising, exhilarating, and even painful moments in the entire episode, one major theme ties it all together. And if you'd like to know what it is, then join me for this episode of The Chosen Explained. Now, before we dive in, let me take a quick moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Angel Studios. And if you're not familiar with Angel Studios, they're the studio who brought you The Chosen. Angel Studios' mission is to tell stories that amplify light and make the kind of movies and shows that families really want to watch, not just the ones that Hollywood chooses. That mission started with The Chosen and is growing to include many other shows like the Wingfeather Saga, the Tuttle Twins, and Testament, a really amazing modern interpretation of the book of Acts. I was actually just watching the Testament movie recently, and I'm really excited to see where this show goes. Their depiction of the parable of the Good Samaritan is one of my favorites. You see, what many people don't realize about the parable of the Good Samaritan is how ironic it is. Jews and Samaritans hated one another. When Jesus told his audience that a Samaritan stopped to help a Jew, not priests and Levites, and that the point of this parable was that the Samaritan was the type of person he was referring to when he said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," his audience would have been shocked. Well, Testament reimagines this parable in a powerful way, highlighting two groups who are relevant in our world today, two groups whose hate we would clearly understand. And you'll totally understand what I mean when you watch it. I don't want to spoil it for you, so make sure you download the Angel app and check out Testament. The app is free to download and works on all major streaming devices. You'll find a link down in the description and up in the card where you can download that app. And right now, let's dive into our video. Now, before we start talking about Philip's feet, I first want to explain something else that will help all the pieces of episode 7 fit together. And that's the geography of Galilee. Over the course of season 3, we've covered a lot of ground. The season began with the Sermon on the Mount in the hills near Chorazim. Jesus visited his hometown of Nazareth. He sent his disciples throughout the region, even to places like Caesarea Philippi, which I have a feeling will become very prominent in a future episode. And they have all spent a lot of time around the Sea of Galilee itself, which makes sense because Capernaum is the home base of Jesus' ministry. It's where James and John, Zebedee and Salome, Simon and Eden all live. But Capernaum also opens our eyes to something bigger going on in this region at that time. You see, Capernaum is a predominantly Jewish town. It's a fishing village, it has a prominent synagogue, it is for the most part a fairly homogeneous town. But move outside of Capernaum, even just to the closest road, and things change quickly. Capernaum was next to a major route that would bring a variety of people from around the world through this region. It was just outside of the Golan Heights, hills that contained cities like Gamla, a zealot stronghold at the time of Jesus. And just southeast of Capernaum, across the Sea of Galilee, you have the Decapolis, a Gentile region containing 10 cities, a population of Hellenistic Jews, and a whole lot of Roman influence. Now, here's what most people don't realize. On a map, it appears that there is a good amount of distance between these different places. Right? The sea looks rather large and the area is spread apart. But when you see the Sea of Galilee in real life, you realize that this isn't the case at all. From Capernaum, you can see the entirety of the Sea of Galilee. You realize that these areas sit practically on top of one another. The faithful Jews of Capernaum are right across the water from the pagans of the Decapolis, and sitting right between them are violent revolutionary zealots. There is incredible tension in this region. There are a whole lot of different opinions and passions, and this is especially true when it comes to the Messiah, which leads us to Philip's feet. As Philip and Andrew return from a mission Jesus has sent them on in the Decapolis, the Chosen has them returning by road. And while they're walking back, Philip injures his foot. Andrew has him sit down so that he can treat it, but then he does something interesting before he treats it. He refuses to take off Philip's sandal. Now, this is one of those moments that's really easy to miss. I mean, it could even appear like Andrew's just asking him to take off his sandal for another reason. But there is something deeper going on here. You see, in the first century, feet were the most filthy part of the body. At a time where everyone wore sandals, whether you were in the desert or in a more lush region like Galilee, your feet would become incredibly dirty. It was common practice to wash your feet as soon as you came into a house. And sometimes you might even be able to have someone do it for you. But that someone would almost certainly be a slave. You see, this is why Andrew doesn't take off Philip's sandal. This is the work of a slave. We see a reference to this mindset in the words of John the Baptist. In John's gospel, John the Baptist is talking about Jesus to a group of Pharisees and says, "He is the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie." In other words, John is saying, I'm not even worthy to be his slave. I'm not even worthy to do one of the lowest, most humiliating things you can do. We also see this mindset in an interaction between Jesus and his disciples. When Jesus goes to wash his disciples' feet, Simon Peter replies, "You shall never wash my feet." And this isn't because Peter has some weird thing about people touching his feet. He's just not going to let Jesus be his slave. You see, the bigger point that's going on in all of this is a question of how we view people and what kind of value we give them. Slaves were people of no value at that time. They were at the bottom of society. They did the worst, most humiliating things, things that the average person would refuse to do. Since they were considered people of lower value, they did the things of lowest value. But that also highlights another situation in this episode. In episode 7, we learn the shocking revelation that the servant boy Gaius mentioned in episode 5 is actually his son. Now, there is a lot that we could talk about when it comes to this relationship between Gaius and this boy's mom and how all of this fits into Roman society. But what I don't want us to miss is something more subtle going on here, something mentioned so quickly that you might not even hear it. At one point, Gaius tells Simon that his young boy is sick and that he can't get treatment for this boy because he's a slave. In other words, this boy isn't worth treating. You see, in Roman culture, there was a hierarchy of value. Some people were valued more than others. Nobles had a greater value than common people. Roman citizens had greater value than non-citizens. And even within the family unit, there were levels of worth. At the top, there was the paterfamilias, which means the father of the family. He was the head of the household and above everyone else. He was served first, he made decisions for the family, and he had control over the other members. At the next level, there were the wife and the kids. They were answerable to the paterfamilias, but they also had authority over others in the house, because below them were the household slaves, the pets, etc. They were at the bottom of the ladder, considered those of least value. As a slave, you weren't a person, you were property. Some people had worth and value, but you didn't. And here's why this is important to understand. This is part of the mindset of the culture at that time. Some people have worth, others don't. Some people are valuable, others aren't. Some people are in, and others are out. And it's through this revelation that we finally begin to see how this thread is weaving its way throughout this episode. Because as we can see, it wasn't just the Gentiles who said that some people are worthy and others aren't. It was also the Jews. And this is where a seemingly random moment like Matthew mentioning Jesus's lineage suddenly becomes very important. When Matthew says that he's researching Jesus's lineage, he's actually referencing something that will appear in Matthew's gospel itself. In fact, it will open Matthew's gospel. Matthew's gospel begins, "This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Now, for most Christians, this is the part of Matthew's gospel that we immediately skip, right? It just seems like a bunch of names. And the story of the angel coming to Mary is way more interesting than this, so we just move on to that. But to a first century Jewish person, this lineage is fascinating. In Jewish culture, your lineage is an important form of introduction. It tells who you are, where you come from. It either explains the greatness from which you descend or the shame from which you are running. Which makes Jesus's lineage really interesting. Because Jesus's lineage is filled with people who shouldn't be there. There are sinful people in Jesus's lineage. There are terrible kings listed. And like Matthew says, there are Gentiles. Now, remember how Matthew opened his gospel? This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. Why would you mention Gentiles in the family line of the Jewish Messiah? I mean, that's like including the names of your ex-girlfriends in your wedding vows. It just doesn't seem like it should go there. But that is the point that Matthew's trying to make in his gospel. For centuries, people believed that the Jewish Messiah was coming to save Jewish people. The Messiah wouldn't come to save the Gentiles. The Messiah was coming to save the Jewish people from the Gentiles, from Gentiles who oppressed them, from Gentiles who took the land that God had given them, from Gentiles who were leading their people away from the Lord. Those Gentiles weren't worthy of the Messiah. They were the problem. What I want you to understand is that this is how people thought at that time. This is in the back of the minds of disciples like Andrew and Philip as they're being sent to places like the Decapolis. It's the refrain that they've heard their entire lives. But the issue of who's in and who's out didn't just apply to Gentiles. It didn't just apply to slaves and free persons. It ran deeper. Right? In the Jewish community, the question of who is in and who is out was also directly tied to sin. You see, there was also a belief at the time of Jesus that sin had a direct impact on whether or not the Messiah even came. Religious leaders would read texts like the Wisdom of Solomon, which says, "And there shall be no unrighteousness in them on his day, for they shall all be holy, and their king shall be the Lord Messiah." Passages like this inspired the Pharisees to believe that the Messiah couldn't come until all were righteous. They believed that everyone had to be perfect before the Messiah would actually come. And because of this, they would ostracize those who they believed were bringing sin into the community, including sick people. This explains why the man on the horse, Nashon, says that the deaf man was being punished for a sin committed by him or his parents. He shares the commonly held belief at that time that sickness was directly connected to sin. People thought that diseases like blindness and leprosy must be punishment for something that you or your ancestors did. In some cases, you would actually be shunned by the community because of this. In fact, this is why Jesus gets in trouble for hanging out with tax collectors and sinners. He's hanging out with sinful people, which means that he's hanging out with the people who they believe are preventing the Messiah from coming. As far as they're concerned, these people are supposed to be out of the community. They have no value in society. In fact, they're the opposite. They are preventing the one that everyone is hoping for. But of course, as we all know, they're wrong. Jesus isn't preventing the Messiah by being with these people. Jesus is the Messiah who has come to save these people. Jesus didn't just come to save this part of the Sea of Galilee. He came to save all of it. He came to be the Messiah for all people, even the slaves, even the zealots, even the Gentiles, even the sick. He came for all. And this is why Philip's feet are so important. They set the tone. They show us that even though Andrew wouldn't take off Philip's sandal, Jesus will be the one who washes all of their feet. Even though his followers won't do the work of a slave, he will be the one who allows himself to become a slave for all, to take our punishment, to bear our sin, to surrender himself for us. It's a reminder that this is who our Messiah is. Even though everyone else says that this person's in and that person's out, even though others say you're worthy and you're not, Jesus says, no, I'm the one who will reveal those things to you. I will tell you who is in and who is out. And to know that answer, you don't have to look anywhere farther than my own family tree, no farther than the people I heal and the places I go, no farther than my disciples themselves. All of it testifies to who I am and who I have come to save. Jesus is saying, I'm not the savior of some, I'm the savior of all. And that includes you. You may have people in your life who tell you that you're not worthy. You may have gone to a church where they made you feel unworthy. You may have read the Bible and thought, I could never be worthy. Well, let me tell you this, you may never be worthy of Jesus. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm not. But that's not what this is about. It isn't about becoming worthy. It's about you receiving the Savior who already is. The Savior whose death on the cross can make you clean, whose resurrection can give you new life. It's about the Savior of the world saying, it doesn't matter if you see yourself as worthy of this because I choose you. And that's what truly matters. This is the message that Jesus is trying to proclaim through these moments in the Bible that are appearing on screen. And it's the message that we all still need to hear today. Well, that's it for this episode of The Chosen Explained. Now make sure to download the Angel Studios app so that you can go back and check out all the scenes that I just highlighted. You'll find a link up here and down in the description. And if you're interested in seeing more of my videos on each episode of The Chosen, just click this link right here. Thank you so much for watching today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.